What's up, Amelia from Revenge Rewired here. Today's story, absolutely wild. Hit subscribe so you never miss one. The conference room at Morrison & Associates felt suffocating that Tuesday morning. Dad had been gone 3 weeks, and I was still processing the loss when my sister Lauren walked in carrying a leather portfolio that I'd never seen before. Dad and I had always been close. After Mom passed 8 years ago, I'd taken him to his doctor appointments, managed his medications, and spent every Sunday afternoon watching old westerns with him. Lauren had moved to Charlotte 6 years back for her sales job, visiting maybe twice a year for major holidays. That was her choice, and Dad never held it against her. He'd divided his estate equally between us in his will, 50% each. Fair and simple. But Lauren had other ideas. She sat across from me at the conference table. Her attorney beside her, some guy named Richard Pemberton from a firm I'd never heard of. Dad's longtime attorney, Gerald Morrison, sat next to me, his expression carefully neutral as he'd been for the past 20 minutes. Before we proceed with the will Gerald has on file, Lauren began, sliding a document across the polished table. I need to present this. I picked up the papers. Last will and testament of Robert James Chen, dated March 15th. Dad had died April 3rd, just 19 days later. My hands went cold as I read through it. Everything: the house in Riverside worth $480,000, his investment portfolio valued at $620,000, his savings accounts totaling $145,000. All of it went to Lauren. I received nothing except a single paragraph explaining that Dad had reconsidered his relationship with both children and determined that Lauren had demonstrated greater devotion to family. This is dated 3 weeks before Dad died, I said quietly, looking up at her. Lauren's expression was pure confidence. Dad called me in February, asked me to come home. We spent his last 6 weeks together, and during that time, he realized some things. She leaned forward. He realized that being there when it is convenient isn't the same as being there when it matters. Dad changed his mind about you in his final months. The accusations stung. I'd been at Dad's house 4 times a week for the past 2 years. I'd reorganized my work schedule to drive him to chemotherapy appointments. I'd held his hand through the pain. Robert never mentioned changing his will to me, Gerald Morrison said carefully, and the will I have on file is dated September 12th of last year. It divides everything equally. Dad wanted a fresh perspective, Richard Pemberton interjected. He came to our firm specifically because he wanted attorney-client privilege with someone new. Someone who wouldn't have preconceived notions about his family dynamics. I studied the document again. The signature looked like Dad's, his distinctive Robert Chen, with the flourished R that he de-developed after decades of signing business contracts. The notary seal appeared legitimate. 2 witnesses I didn't recognize had signed at the bottom. But something felt wrong. Dad had been clear with me. Even in his final weeks, everything's set up fair. He'd told me the week before he died, "You and your sister will both be taken care of." "I'd like to see the original document," Gerald said. "This appears to be a copy." "The original is in our firm's safe," Richard replied. "We can schedule a time for you to examine it." Lauren stood, smoothing her black dress. "I know this is difficult, Marcus, but Dad made his choice. He saw who really loved him unconditionally, and who was just going through the motions." She paused at the door. "You can contest this if you want, but you'll be fighting Dad's final wishes, and honestly, that tells me everything about why he made this decision." The door closed behind them with a soft click. Gerald waited 30 seconds, then turned to me. "Don't say anything yet. Give me a moment." He opened his laptop and pulled up a file. "The will I have is dated September 12th, as I mentioned. But there's something interesting about the date on Lauren's version, March 15th. What Robert came to see me on September 18th, just 6 days after signing his will with me. He specifically said he wanted to make sure I understood that this was his final version, that he'd been thinking about it for months, and that under no circumstances should any changes be made without him coming to this office in person and discussing it with me first. Gerald looked at me directly. He said, and I quote, "If anyone shows up claiming I changed my mind, I didn't. This is it." My throat tightened. That sounds like Dad. I found it unusual enough to make a detailed note in my file. "Your father struck me as someone concerned about potential interference after his death." Gerald closed his laptop. "Marcus, I need to ask you something important. Do you want to contest this?" I thought about Lauren's confident smile, about the document that felt wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. about Dad's voice telling me everything was set up fair. Yes, I said. I want to contest it. Good, because I don't believe that will is genuine, and I think we can prove it. He pulled out his phone. I'm calling someone who specializes in this exact type of case. 3 days later, I sat in the offices of Patricia Holbrook, a probate litigation attorney who Gerald described as the best in the state at spotting estate fraud. Patricia was in her mid-50s, with steel gray hair and the focused intensity of someone who'd seen every trick in the book. She'd spent the past hour reviewing both wills, asking questions about Dad's health timeline, and taking notes in neat handwriting. Your father had pancreatic cancer, she said, diagnosed 18 months ago. What was his condition in March? Declining rapidly, I said. He'd stopped chemo in February. He was on hospice care by mid-March. The pain medication kept him pretty out of it most days. Was he lucid on March 15th specifically? I pulled out my phone and checked my calendar. I was with him that afternoon. He was having a bad day, high pain levels, very confused. He called me by Mom's name twice. There's no way he could have clearly executed a legal document. Patricia made a note. Do you have any documentation of that visit? I logged his medications in the hospice journal, and I texted my wife about how hard it was to see him like that. I showed her the messages. Dad doesn't know what day it is. This is breaking my heart. Excellent. Keep everything documented. Now, here's what I need you to understand. If we're going to challenge this will, we need to prove either that your father lacked capacity, that there was undue influence, or that the document itself is fraudulent. She tapped Lauren's will. Given your father's condition in March and the suspicious timing, we have grounds for all 3 arguments. What's our first step? We file a will contest in probate court. That freezes the estate. Nothing can be distributed until the court makes a determination. Then, we conduct discovery. I want to see the original document, interview the witnesses, examine the notary records, and potentially bring in experts. What kind of experts? Patricia smiled. That depends on what we find, but I have a feeling we're going to need a forensic document examiner. The probate court filing hit Lauren like a freight train. She called me that evening, her voice tight with anger. You're actually doing this. You're going to drag Dad's name through court because you can't accept his decision. I'm making sure Dad's real wishes are honored, I said calmly. This is pathetic. Marcus, everyone's going to see how desperate you are for money you don't deserve. Then you have nothing to worry about. If the will is legitimate, the court will uphold it. She hung up. 2 weeks later, we were in Patricia's conference room for the deposition of Richard Pemberton. Lauren's attorney looked noticeably less confident than he had at our first meeting. Patricia started with basic questions about his firm, his experience with estate planning, and his standard procedures. Then she shifted gears. Mr. Pemberton, how did Robert Chen first contact your firm? He called our office in early March. Do you have records of that call? Our receptionist took the message. I returned the call. And what did he say when you spoke to him? Richard hesitated. He expressed interest in updating his estate plan. Did he explain why he wanted to change firms after working with Gerald Morrison for over 20 years? He said he wanted a fresh perspective. Those exact words, fresh perspective. Something like that. Patricia made a note. When did you first meet with Robert in person? March 15th, he came to our office. What time? Around 2 in the afternoon. How did he seem? Lucid, determined. He knew what he wanted. Did he arrive alone? Richard shifted in his seat. His daughter accompanied him. Lauren Chen. Yes. Did she participate in the meeting? She helped her father into the office. He had mobility issues. Did she remain in the room during your consultation? Another pause. For part of it. Which part? She was present during the initial discussion. Then I asked her to step out while I reviewed the specific terms with Robert privately. Patricia leaned forward. How long was that private conversation? Perhaps 10 minutes. And in those 10 minutes, Robert Chenamen, in late-stage pancreatic cancer, on hospice care, who, according to medical records, was prescribed 120 milligrams of morphine daily, clearly articulated his desire to disinherit one child and leave everything to another. He was clear about his wishes. Did you request any medical evaluation of his capacity? He seemed competent to me. You're not a doctor, are you, Mr. Pemberton? No, but I've done thousands of wills. I know capacity when I see it. Patricia pulled out a document. According to hospice records, Robert Chen's morphine dose was increased to 180 milligrams daily on March 14th due to increased pain. The hospice nurse noted significant confusion and disorientation during her visit on the morning of March 15th. Did Robert mention any of this to you? Richard's jaw tightened. No. Did you ask about his medications? Not specifically. Did you ask about his medical condition? He mentioned he had cancer, but you didn't inquire about his cognitive state. Despite meeting a hospice patient who is making a dramatic change to his estate plan, I assessed his capacity during our conversation, based on 10 minutes of private discussion. Based on my professional judgment, Patricia let the silence hang for a moment. Let's talk about the witnesses. Who witnessed the will signing? 2 of our staff members, Jennifer Walsh and David Kim. Are they familiar with standard will signing protocols? Yes. Jennifer is a paralegal. David is our office manager. Did either of them have any concerns about Robert's capacity? Not that they expressed me. We'll need to depose them as well. Patricia made another note. Now, regarding the original document, you indicated it's in your firm's safe, correct? I'd like to arrange for our forensic document examiner to inspect it. Dr. Sarah Chun from the Pacific Forensic Laboratory. When can we schedule that? Richard glanced at Lauren, who sat next to him with crossed arms. We'll need to check our schedule, Mr. Pemberton. This is discovery. You don't get to delay providing evidence. We can schedule it now, or I can ask the judge to compel production. Which would you prefer? Fine, next Tuesday. Excellent. Dr. Chen will need approximately 3 hours with the document. She'll be conducting several non-destructive tests, including infrared spectroscopy, indented writing analysis, and ink dating analysis. For the first time, Richard's professional composure cracked. Ink dating. Yes, it's a fascinating process. Ink contains volatile solvents that evaporate over time at predictable rates. By analyzing the chemical composition, experts can often determine within a range of weeks when ink was applied to paper. Patricia smiled pleasantly. It's particularly useful in cases where the dating of a document is in question. Lauren leaned over and whispered something to Richard. His face had gone pale. Is there a problem? Patricia asked. No problem, Richard said, but his voice had lost its certainty. We'll have the document available Tuesday. Dr. Sarah Chen arrived at Richard Pemberton's office the following Tuesday morning with 2 large cases of equipment and a professional demeanor that made it clear she'd done this hundreds of times. I'd spoken with her on the phone the previous week. She'd explained her background: PhD in analytical chemistry, 15 years specializing in forensic document examination, testimony in over 200 cases. Patricia trusted her completely. This is relatively straightforward, Dr. Chen had told me. If the will was genuinely signed on March 15th, the ink should show aging consistent with approximately 7 months. If it was signed more recently, we'll see different levels of solvent evaporation. Richard Pemberton handed over the original will with obvious reluctance. Dr. Chen put on white cotton gloves and carefully placed the document on her examination table. I'll start with non-invasive analysis, she explained, positioning a specialized camera above the will. High-resolution imaging first, then multispectral analysis, then ink sampling. For the next hour, Patricia and I watched as Dr. Chen photographed the document under various light wavelengths, examined it under magnification, and made careful notes. She paid particular attention to Dad's signature and the handwritten date. Interesting, she murmured, adjusting her microscope. What did you find? Patricia asked. The ink has some unusual characteristics. I'll need to run the full chemical analysis back at the lab, but I'm seeing some preliminary indicators that concern me. She looked up. The signature shows very little aging degradation. The paper has appropriate aging for a document from March, but the ink appears significantly fresher. Richard shifted uncomfortably. What does that mean? It means I need to complete my analysis before drawing conclusions. Dr. Chen carefully extracted tiny samples of ink from several locations on the document using a specialized needle. These samples will undergo gas chromatography mass spectrometry. The results should be available in 72 hours, and that will tell us when the document was written. I asked. It will tell us the age of the ink with reasonable accuracy. Combined with my other findings, we should be able to establish a timeline. 3 days felt like 3 months. I went through the motions at work, helped my wife with our daughter's school project, and tried not to obsessively check my phone for updates. On Friday afternoon, Patricia called. We need to meet. Dr. Chun has the results. An hour later, I sat in Patricia's conference room while Dr. Chun connected her laptop to the large monitor on the wall. I'll start with my conclusion, then explain the evidence, Dr. Chun said. The will, purportedly dated March 15th, was actually written sometime in mid to late April, approximately 2 to 3 weeks after Robert Chen's death on April 3rd. The room seemed to tilt. I'd suspected the will was fraudulent, but having proof was something else entirely. How certain are you? Patricia asked. Extremely certain. Let me walk you through the findings. Dr. Chun pulled up a series of graphs. First, the ink analysis. The pen used was a standard Pilot G2 with black gel ink. These pens use a water-based gel that contains specific volatile organic compounds, primarily 2-phenoxyethanol and glycol ethers. She clicked to the next slide, showing complex chemical structures. These compounds evaporate in a predictable pattern over time. Fresh ink shows high concentrations as ink ages. These levels decrease according to established degradation curves. And what did you find in this case? Patricia prompted. The signature and date on the contested will show solvent concentrations consistent with ink applied approximately 14 to 21 days before my examination on October 15th. That places the actual writing date between September 24th and October 1st. Dr. Chen highlighted a section of the graph. Compare that to these control samples from known documents dated in March. You can see a dramatic difference in the evaporation curves. She pulled up photographs of the will under different light spectrums. Additionally, infrared imaging revealed several concerning features. The signature shows characteristics of being written slowly and carefully, hesitation marks, uneven pressure, and deliberate stroke patterns. This is consistent with someone copying or forging a signature rather than natural signing. Could it just be because Dad was sick? I asked, though I already knew the answer. That's a fair question. I compared this signature to authentic signatures from documents we know Robert Chen signed in February and early March medical forms, hospice admission paperwork. Those showed tremor patterns and genuine writing difficulty. But they don't show the deliberate copying behavior I'm seeing here. This signature was produced by someone trying to replicate Robert Chun's handwriting, not by Robert Chun himself. Dr. Chun clicked to another image. Finally, I found trace indentations on the paper suggesting this page was written on top of another document. The pressure patterns created subtle impressions that are visible under specialized lighting. I was able to partially reconstruct the underlying text. The screen showed a faint impression of words. I could make out practice and something that looked like signature. Someone practiced forging Dad's signature, I said quietly. It appears so. The evidence strongly suggests this will was created after Robert Chen's death by someone with access to examples of his signature who attempted to forge his handwriting. Patricia turned to me. Marcus, I need you to understand what this means. We're not just talking about a contested will anymore. We're talking about criminal fraud, forgery, potentially theft by deception. We need to involve law enforcement. Will this hold up in court? I asked. Dr. Chen nodded firmly. I'll stake my professional reputation on it. The science is sound, the methodology is established, and the evidence is overwhelming. This document was not created when it claims to be created, and the signature is not authentic. The probate hearing was scheduled for November 3rd. Patricia filed a motion to invalidate Lauren's will based on fraud, attaching Dr. Chen's 50-page report with detailed technical findings, photographs, chemical analysis, and expert conclusions. Lauren's attorney requested a continuance. The judge denied it. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, wood-paneled and formal. Judge Margaret Reynolds had a reputation for having zero tolerance for estate fraud. She'd been reviewing the case file for the past week, and her expression suggested she'd already formed some opinions. Lauren sat at the defendant's table with Richard Pemberton and another attorney apparently. They brought in additional counsel when they saw Dr. Chen's report. She wouldn't look at me. We're here regarding the estate of Robert James Chen. Judge Reynolds began. The petitioner, Marcus Chen, contests the will dated March 15th and argues that the will dated September 12th should be recognized as the valid final testament. The basis for this contest is alleged forgery. Ms. Holbrook, present your case. Patricia stood, professional and precise. Your Honor, we have irrefutable scientific evidence that the contested will was created after Robert Chen's death and contains a forged signature. I'd like to call Dr. Sarah Chen as our expert witness. For the next hour, Dr. Chen walked the judge through her analysis. She explained ink chemistry in terms anyone could understand, showed photographs and graphs, and answered questions with the patience of someone who knew her evidence was rock solid. The ink was approximately 2 to 3 weeks old when I examined it on October 15th, Dr. Chen concluded. This means it was applied to paper between September 24th and October 1st, at the earliest nearly 6 months after the document claims to be dated, and several weeks after Mr. Chen's death. Judge Reynolds studied the report, and you're stating this with scientific certainty. Yes, Your Honor. The methodology I used is well established and accepted in forensic science. The margin of error is approximately plus or minus 5 days. There is no scenario under which this ink could be 7 months old, as the document claims. Mr. Pemberton, the judge said, turning to Lauren's attorney, I've read your response to Dr. Chen's report. You suggest that the ink analysis is unreliable and that environmental factors could affect the results. Do you have an expert who can refute Dr. Chen's findings? Richard stood slowly. Your Honor, we've consulted with several forensic experts, and while some have questioned certain aspects of ink dating methodology, do say you have an expert who will testify that this ink is 7 months old. Silence, Mr. Pemberton. I asked you a direct question. No, Your Honor. The experts we consulted indicated that Dr. Chen's analysis appears technically sound. However, we maintain that there could be other explanations such as, Richard glanced at Lauren, we're prepared to argue that the original will may have been damaged, and that this is a reconstructed version. Reconstructed by whom? After Mr. Chen's death, with a forged signature. Judge Reynolds's voice had taken on an edge. Mr. Pemberton, I'm going to be very direct with you. The evidence before me suggests that someone created a fraudulent will after Robert Chen died, forged his signature, and attempted to steal over $1 million from his son. Do you have any evidence whatsoever that contradicts that conclusion? Your Honor, we would argue evidence, Mr. Pemberton, not arguments, not theories, evidence. Richard's face had gone from pale to white. No, Your Honor. Judge Reynolds set down her pen. Then, here's my ruling. The will dated March 15th is invalid. It was not created on the date it claims. It does not contain Robert Chen's authentic signature, and it does not represent his testamentary wishes. The will dated September 12th, currently held by Gerald Morrison and properly executed with witnesses, is Robert Chen's valid last will and testament. I felt something loosen in my chest, relief, vindication, grief, all mixed together. Furthermore, the judge continued, I'm referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for Criminal Investigation. Ms. Chen, you and your attorney, Mr. Pemberton, should expect to be contacted by law enforcement regarding potential charges of forgery, fraud, and attempted theft. Lauren's head snapped up. What? I didn't, Ms. Chen. I strongly advise you not to say anything further without consulting with a criminal defense attorney. Judge Reynolds looked at her directly. Someone created this fraudulent document. Someone forged your father's signature. Someone attempted to steal your brother's inheritance. The evidence suggests that someone had significant motivation and opportunity. I'll let the DA determine who that someone is. Richard Pemberton leaned over and whispered urgently to Lauren. She looked like she might be sick. The estate will be administered according to the September 12th will, Judge Reynolds said. Gerald Morrison will continue as executor. Ms. Holbrook, please prepare an order reflecting this ruling. Mr. Pemberton, your firm may be subject to additional investigation regarding your due diligence failures in this matter. We're adjourned. The DA's investigation moved quickly. Within 2 weeks, they de-interviewed the witnesses who claimed to have seen Dad sign the will. Both admitted under questioning that they actually just signed a blank document at Richard's request and never saw Dad at all. The notary seal turned out to be from a notary who retired in 2019 and whose seal had been reported missing around the same time. Phone records showed dozens of calls between Lauren and Richard Pemberton in the weeks after Dad's death. Bank records revealed Lauren had paid Richard's firm $15,000 as a consultation fee 3 days after Dad died. Unusual timing for estate planning services. The most damning evidence came from Lauren's home computer. Digital forensics found multiple documents in her trash folder, practice sheets with Dad's signature written over and over. Internet searches for how long before ink can be dated and statute of limitations, estate fraud, and a draft of the fake will with notes in the margins like, make handwriting shakier and check signature angle. On December 8, Lauren was arrested at her home in Charlotte. The charges included forgery in the first degree, criminal fraud, and attempted theft by deception. Richard Pemberton was charged with conspiracy to commit fraud and professional misconduct. I didn't feel triumph when I heard, just exhaustion and sadness. The estates settled quickly after that. The house, the investments, the accounts, everything divided exactly as Dad had intended. 50-50, fair and simple. I donated 10% of my inheritance to the hospice program that had cared for Dad in his final weeks. They named a room in his honor. Lauren's trial is scheduled for next spring. Her attorney is pushing for a plea deal apparently. The prosecution has surveillance footage of her entering Richard Pemberton's office 4 times in the week after Dad's funeral, and expert testimony that the forged signature matches her handwriting patterns more closely than Dad's. Gerald Morrison called me last week to finalize some paperwork. Your father knew, he told me, when he came to see me in September, and insisted on that protective language. He said, I love both my kids, but I know human nature. Money makes people do terrible things. He was right. I think about that a lot, about Dad's foresight, about how he tried to protect his own wishes even after death, about how close Lauren came to getting away with it. The forensic ink analysis took 3 days. 3 days to prove that everything Lauren claimed was a lie. 3 days to expose a forgery she'd spent weeks planning. 3 days to ensure that Dad's real wishes, the ones written in his own hand when he was clear-headed and certain, were honored. Sometimes I wonder what she was thinking in those weeks after Dad died. Did she really believe she could forge a will and no one would question it? Did she think I'd just accept losing everything Dad meant for me? Did she consider, even for a moment, that what she was doing was not just illegal but a betrayal of everything Dad stood for? I'll never know. She won't take my calls, and her attorney has advised her not to speak to me, so I focus on what I can control. I set up a college fund for my daughter, using part of the inheritance. I'm working with a financial advisor to invest the rest responsibly, and I've established a small annual scholarship in Dad's name at his alma mater for students who demonstrate integrity and honesty in their academic work. Because in the end, that's what this was about. Not the money, though the money mattered. It was about integrity, about truth, about making sure that when someone says, "This is what I want," those words mean something even after they're gone. Dad's signature meant something. His wishes meant something. And 3 days of forensic analysis proved it.